Hello, welcome to Edusquare. Dear students and teachers, unlock the heart of English literature with our immersive audiobook for Class 11 Semester 2 on Edusquare. Dive deep into timeless tales and powerful poetry, guided by the passionate narration edited by Masud Alam. Join us for Catherine Mansfield's vivid The Garden Party, the thrilling story of Jimmy Valentine by O. Henry, the wisdom of Bacon's Of Studies, and the humanity in Mother Teresa's Nobel lecture. Plus, feel the pulse of Robert Browning's My Last Duchess and Maya Angelou's empowering Still I Rise. Every chapter, every line, ready to inspire, engage, and elevate your learning experience. Subscribe now, and let's journey through literature together.
The Garden Party, Catherine Mansfield. And after all, the weather was ideal. They could not have had a more perfect day for a garden party if they had ordered it. Windless, warm, the sky without a cloud. Only the blue was veiled with a haze of light gold, as it is sometimes in early summer. The gardener had been up since dawn, mowing the lawns and sweeping them, until the grass and the dark flat rosettes where the daisy plants had been seemed to shine. As for the roses, you could not help feeling they understood that roses are the only flowers that impress people at garden parties, the only flowers that everybody is certain of knowing. Hundreds, yes, literally hundreds, had come out in a single night. The green bushes bowed down as though they had been visited by archangels. Breakfast was not yet over before the men came to put up the marquee. "Where do you want the marquee put, Mother?" "My dear child, it's no use asking me. I'm determined to leave everything to you children this year. Forget I am your mother. Treat me as an honored guest." But Meg could not possibly go and supervise the men. She had washed her hair before breakfast, and she sat drinking her coffee in a green turban, with a dark wet curl stamped on each cheek. Jose, the butterfly, always came down in a silk petticoat and a kimono jacket. "You'll have to go, Laura. You're the artistic one." Away Laura flew, still holding her piece of bread and butter. It's so delicious to have an excuse for eating out of doors, and besides, she loved having to arrange things. She always felt she could do it so much better than anybody else. 4 men in their shirt sleeves stood grouped together on the garden path. They carried staves covered with rolls of canvas, and they had big tool bags slung on their backs. They looked impressive. Laura wished now that she was not holding that piece of bread and butter, but there was nowhere to put it, and she couldn't possibly throw it away. She blushed and tried to look severe and even a little bit short-sighted as she came up to them. "Good morning," she said, copying her mother's voice. But that sounded so fearfully affected that she was ashamed and stammered like a little girl. "Oh, have you come? Is it about the marquee?" "That's right, miss," said the tallest of the men, a lanky, freckled fellow, and he shifted his tool bag, knocked back his straw hat, and smiled down at her. That's about it. His smile was so easy, so friendly, that Laura recovered. What nice eyes he had! Small, but such a dark blue. And now she looked at the others, they were smiling too. "Cheer up, we won't bite," their smiles seemed to say. How very nice workmen were! And what a beautiful morning! She mustn't mention the morning. She must be businesslike. The marquee. Well, what about the lily lawn? Would that do? And she pointed to the lily lawn with the hand that didn't hold the bread and butter. They turned, they stared in the direction. A little fat chap thrust out his underlip, and the tall fellow frowned. "I don't fancy it," said he. "Not conspicuous enough. You see, with a thing like a marquee," and he turned to Laura in his easy way, "you want to put it somewhere where it'll give you a bang slap in the eye if you follow me." Laura's upbringing made her wonder for a moment whether it was quite respectful of a workman to talk to her of bangs slap in the eye, but she did quite follow him. A corner of the tennis court, she suggested. But the band's going to be in one comer. Going to have a band, are you? Said another of the workmen. He was pale. He had a haggard look as his dark eyes scanned the tennis court. What was he thinking? Only a very small band, said Laura gently. Perhaps he wouldn't mind so much if the band was quite small. But the tall fellow interrupted. Look here, miss, that's the place. Against those trees. Over there. That'll do fine. Against the Caracas. Then the Caraca trees would be hidden. And they were so lovely, with their broad gleaming leaves and their clusters of yellow fruit. They were like trees you imagined growing on a desert island, proud, solitary, lifting their leaves and fruits to the sun in a kind of silent splendor. Must they be hidden by a marquee? They must. Already the men had shouldered their staves and were making for the place. Only the tall fellow was left. He bent down, pinched a sprig of lavender, put his thumb and forefinger to his nose, and snuffed up the smell. When Laura saw that gesture, she forgot all about the Caracas in her wonder at him caring for things like that, caring for the smell of lavender. How many men that she knew would have done such a thing? Oh, how extraordinarily nice workmen were, she thought. Why couldn't she have workmen for her friends rather than the silly boys she danced with and who came to Sunday night supper? She would get on much better with men like these. It's all the fault, she decided, as the tall fellow drew something on the back of an envelope, something that was to be looped up or left to hang, of these absurd class distinctions. Well, for her part, she didn't feel them. Not a bit, not an atom. And now there came the chock-chock of wooden hammers. Someone whistled. Someone sang out, "Are you right there, matey?" Matey! The friendliness of it, the bee. Just to prove how happy she was, just to show the tall fellow how at home she felt, and how she despised stupid conventions. Laura took a big bite of her bread and butter as she stared at the little drawing. She felt just like a work girl. Laura, Laura, where are you? Telephone, Laura, a voice cried from the house. Coming. Away she skimmed over the lawn, up the path, up the steps, across the veranda, and into the porch. In the hall, her father and Laurie were brushing their hats ready to go to the office. I say, Laura, said Laurie very fast, you might just give a squiz at my coat before this afternoon. See if it wants pressing. I will, said she. Suddenly she couldn't stop herself. She ran at Laurie and gave him a small, quick squeeze. Oh, I do love parties, don't you? Gasped Laura. There, said Laurie's warm, boyish voice, and he squeezed his sister too, and gave her a gentle push. Dash off to the telephone, old girl. The telephone. Yes, yes, oh yes, Kitty. Good morning, dear. Come to lunch, do, dear. Delighted, of course. It will only be a very scratch meal, just the sandwich crusts and broken meringue shells, and what's left over. Yes, isn't it a perfect morning? You're white? Oh, I certainly should. One moment, hold the line. Mother's calling. And Laura sat back. What, Mother? Can't hear. Mrs. Sheridan's voice floated down the stairs. Tell her to wear that sweet hat she had on last Sunday. Mother says you're to wear that sweet hat you had on last Sunday. Good. 1 o'clock. Bye-bye. Laura put back the receiver, flung her arms over her head, took a deep breath, stretched, and let them fall. Huh, she sighed, and the moment after the sigh she sat up quickly. She was still, listening. All the doors in the house seemed to be open. The house was alive with soft, quick steps and running voices. The green baize door that led to the kitchen regions swung open and shut with a muffled thud. And now there came a long, chuckling, absurd sound. It was the heavy piano being moved on its stiff casters. But the air. If you stopped to notice, was the air always like this? Little faint winds were playing chase in at the tops of the windows, out at the doors. And there were two tiny spots of sun, one on the ink pot, one on a silver photograph frame, playing too. Darling little spots, especially the one on the ink pot lid. It was quite warm, a warm little silver star. She could have kissed it. The front door bell pealed, and there sounded the rustle of Sadie's print skirt on the stairs. A man's voice murmured. Sadie answered, careless, I'm sure I don't know. Wait, I'll ask Mrs. Sheridan. What is it, Sadie? Laura came into the hall. It's the florist, Miss Laura. It was indeed. There, just inside the door, stood a wide, shallow tray full of pots of pink lilies. No other kind. Nothing but lilies, canna lilies, big pink flowers, wide open, radiant, almost frighteningly alive on bright crimson stems. Oh, Sadie, said Laura, and the sound was like a little moan. She crouched down as if to warm herself at that blaze of lilies. She felt they were in her fingers, on her lips, growing in her breast. It's some mistake, she said faintly. Nobody ever ordered so many. Sadie, go and find Mother. But at that moment Mrs. Sheridan joined them. It's quite right, she said calmly. Yes, I ordered them. Aren't they lovely? She pressed Laura's arm. I was passing the shop yesterday, and I saw them in the window, and I suddenly thought for once in my life I shall have enough canna lilies. The garden party will be a good excuse. But I thought you said you didn't mean to interfere, said Laura. Sadie had gone. The florist's man was still outside at his van. She put her arm round her mother's neck and gently, very gently, she bit her mother's ear. My darling child, you wouldn't like a logical mother, would you? Don't do that. Here's the man. He carried more lilies still, another whole tray. Bank them up just inside the door on both sides of the porch, please, said Mrs. Sheridan. Don't you agree, Laura? Oh, I do, Mother. In the drawing room, Meg, Jose, and good little Hans had at last succeeded in moving the piano. Now, if we put this Chesterfield against the wall and move everything out of the room except the chairs, don't you think? Quite. Hans, move these tables into the smoking room, and bring a sweeper to take these marks off the carpet, and one moment, Hans Jose loved giving orders to the servants, and they loved obeying her. She always made them feel they were taking part in some drama. Tell Mother and Miss Laura to come here at once. Very good, Miss Jose. She turned to Meg. I want to hear what the piano sounds like, just in case I'm asked to sing this afternoon. Let's try over This Life is Weary. Pom, ta-ta-ta, ti-ta. The piano burst out so passionately that Jose's face changed. She clasped her hands. She looked mournfully and enigmatically at her mother and Laura as they came in. This life is weary, a tear a sigh. A love that changes. This life is weary, a tear a sigh. A love that changes, and then, goodbye. But at the word, goodbye, and although the piano sounded more desperate than ever, her face broke into a brilliant, dreadfully unsympathetic smile. Aren't I in good voice, Mummy? She beamed. This life is weary, hope comes to die, a dream awakening. But now Sadie interrupted them. What is it, Sadie? If you please, Mum, cook says, have you got the flags for the sandwiches? The flags for the sandwiches, Sadie, echoed Mrs. Sheridan dreamily, and the children knew by her face that she hadn't got them. Let me see. And she said to Sadie firmly, Tell cook I'll let her have them in 10 minutes. Sadie went. Now, Laura, said her mother quickly, come with me into the smoking room. I've got the names somewhere on the back of an envelope. You'll have to write them out for me. Meg, go upstairs this minute and take that wet thing off your head. Jose, run and finish dressing this instant. Do you hear me, children? Or shall I have to tell your father when he comes home tonight? And Josie, Pacify cook if you do go into the kitchen, will you? I'm terrified of her this morning. The envelope was found at last behind the dining room clock, though how it had got there Mrs. Sheridan could not imagine. One of you children must have stolen it out of my bag, because I remember vividly cream cheese and lemon curd. Have you done that? Yes. Egg, and Mrs. Sheridan held the envelope away from her. It looks like mice. It can't be mice, can it? Olive, pet, said Laura, looking over her shoulder. Yes, of course, Olive. What a horrible combination it sounds. Egg and olive. They were finished at last, and Laura took them off to the kitchen. She found Jose there pacifying the cook, who did not look at all terrifying. I have never seen such exquisite sandwiches, said Jose's rapturous voice. How many kinds did you say there were, cook? 15. 15, Miss Jose. Well, cook, I congratulate you. Cook swept up crusts with the long sandwich knife and smiled broadly. Godber's has come, announced Sadie, issuing out of the pantry. She had seen the man pass the window. That meant the cream puffs had come. Godber's were famous for their cream puffs. Nobody ever thought of making them at home. Bring them in and put them on the table, my girl, ordered cook. Sadie brought them in and went back to the door. Of course, Laura and Jose were far too grown up to really care about such things. All the same, they couldn't help agreeing that the puffs looked very attractive. Very. Cook began arranging them, shaking off the extra icing sugar. Don't they carry one back to all one's parties? Said Laura. I suppose they do, said practical Jose, who never liked to be carried back. They look beautifully light and feathery, I must say. Have one each, my dears, said Cook in her comfortable voice. Your ma won't know. Oh, impossible. Fancy cream puffs so soon after breakfast. The very idea made one shudder. All the same, 2 minutes later, Jose and Laura were licking their fingers with that absorbed inward look that only comes from whipped cream. Let's go into the garden, out by the back way, suggested Laura. I want to see how the men are getting on with the marquis. They're such awfully nice men. But the back door was blocked by Cook, Sadie, Godber's man, and Hans. Something had happened. Tuck, 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 clucked Cook like an agitated hen. Sadie had her hand clapped to her cheek as though she had toothache. Hans's face was screwed up in the effort to understand. Only Godber's man seemed to be enjoying himself. It was his story. What's the matter? What's happened? There's been a horrible accident, said Cook. A man killed. A man killed. Where? How? When? But Godber's man wasn't going to have his story snatched from under his nose. Know those little cottages just below here, miss? Know them? Of course, she knew them. Well, there's a young chap living there, name of Scott, a carter. His horse shied at a traction engine, corner of Hawk Street this morning, and he was thrown out on the back of his head, killed. Dead. Laura stared at Godber's man. Dead when they picked him up, said Godber's man with relish. They were taking the body home as I come up here. And he said to the cook, he's left a wife and 5 little ones. Jose, come here. What? Laura caught hold of her sister's sleeve and dragged her through the kitchen to the other side of the green baize door. There she paused and leaned against it. Jose, she said, horrified. However are we going to stop everything? Stop everything, Laurel, cried Jose in astonishment. What do you mean? Stop the garden party, of course. Why did Jose pretend? But Jose was still more amazed. Stop the garden party? My dear Laura, don't be so absurd. Of course we can't do anything of the kind. Nobody expects us to. Don't be so extravagant. But we can't possibly have a garden party with a man dead just outside the front gate. That really was extravagant, for the little cottages were in a lane to themselves at the very bottom of a steep rise that led up to the house. A broad road ran between. True, they were far too near. They were the greatest possible eyesore, and they had no right to be in that neighborhood at all. They were little mean dwellings painted a chocolate brown. In the garden patches there was nothing but cabbage stalks, sick hens, and tomato cans. The very smoke coming out of their chimneys was poverty-stricken. Little rags and shreds of smoke, so unlike the great silvery plumes that uncurled from the Sheridans' chimneys. Washerwomen lived in the lane, and sweeps, and a cobbler, and a man whose house front was studded all over with minute bird cages. Children swarmed. When the Sheridans were little, they were forbidden to set foot there because of the revolting language and of what they might catch. But since they were grown up, Laura and Laurie on their prowls sometimes walked through. It was disgusting and sordid. They came out with a shudder. But still, one must go everywhere. One must see everything. So through they went. And just think of what the band would sound like to that poor woman, said Laura. Oh, Laura! Jose began to be seriously annoyed. If you're going to stop a band playing every time someone has an accident, you'll lead a very strenuous life. I'm every bit as sorry about it as you. I feel just as sympathetic. Her eyes hardened. She looked at her sister just as she used to when they were little and fighting together. You won't bring a drunken workman back to life by being sentimental, she said softly. Drunk? Who said he was drunk? Laura turned furiously on Jose. She said, just as they had used to say on those occasions, I'm going straight up to tell Mother. Do, dear Jose. Mother, can I come into your room? Laura turned the big glass doorknob. Of course, child. Why, what's the matter? What's given you such a color? And Mrs. Sheridan turned round from her dressing table. She was trying on a new hat. Mother, a man's been killed, began Laura. Not in the garden, interrupted her mother. No, no. Oh, what a fright you gave me. Mrs. Sheridan sighed with relief and took off the big hat and held it on her knees. But listen, Mother, said Laura. Breathless, half-choking, she told the dreadful story. Of course, we can't have our party, can we? She pleaded. The band and everybody arriving. They'd hear us, Mother, they're nearly neighbors. To Laura's astonishment, her mother behaved just like Jose. It was harder to bear because she seemed amused. She refused to take Laura seriously. But dear child, use your common sense. It's only by accident we've heard of it. If someone had died there normally, and I can't understand how they keep alive in those poky little holes, we should still be having our party, shouldn't we? Laura had to say yes to that, but she felt it was all wrong. She sat down on her mother's sofa and pinched the cushion frill. Mother, isn't it terribly heartless of us? She asked. Darling. Mrs. Sheridan got up and came over to her, carrying the hat. Before Laura could stop her, she had popped it on. My child, said her mother, the hat is yours. It's made for you. It's much too young for me. I have never seen you look such a picture. Look at yourself. And she held up her hand mirror. But Mother, Laura began again. She couldn't look at herself. She turned aside. This time Mrs. Sheridan lost patience just as Jose had done. You are being very absurd, Laura, she said coldly. People like that don't expect sacrifices from us. And it's not very sympathetic to spoil everybody's enjoyment as you're doing now. I don't understand, said Laura, and she walked quickly out of the room into her own bedroom. There, quite by chance, the first thing she saw was this charming girl in the mirror, in her black hat trimmed with gold daisies and a long black velvet ribbon. Never had she imagined she could look like that. Is Mother right? She thought. And now she hoped her mother was right. Am I being extravagant? Perhaps it was extravagant. Just for a moment she had another glimpse of that poor woman and those little children, and the body being carried into the house. But it all seemed blurred, unreal, like a picture in the newspaper. I'll remember it again after the party's over, she decided, and somehow that seemed quite the best plan. Lunch was over by 1:30. By 2:30 they were all ready for the fray. The green-coated band had arrived and was established in a corner of the tennis court. "My dear," trilled Kitty Maitland, "aren't they too like frogs for words? You ought to have arranged them round the pond with the conductor in the middle on a leaf." Laurie arrived and hailed them on his way to dress. At the sight of him, Laura remembered the accident again. She wanted to tell him. If Laurie agreed with the others, then it was bound to be all right, and she followed him into the hall. "L'Oreal." "Hello." He was halfway upstairs, but when he turned round and saw Laura, he suddenly puffed out his cheeks and goggled his eyes at her. "My word, Laura, you do look stunning," said Laurie. "What an absolutely topping hat." Laura said faintly, "Is it?" and smiled up at Laurie, and didn't tell him after all. Soon after that, people began coming in streams. The band struck up. The hired waiters ran from the house to the marquee. Wherever you looked, there were couples strolling, bending to the flowers, greeting, moving on over the lawn. They were like bright birds that had alighted in the Sheridans' garden for this one afternoon, on their way to where? Ah, what happiness it is to be with people who all are happy, to press hands, press cheeks, smile into eyes. "Darling Laura, how well you look. What a becoming hat, child. Laura, you look quite Spanish. I've never seen you look so striking." And Laura, glowing, answered softly, "Have you had tea? Won't you have an ice? The passion fruit ices really are rather special." She ran to her father and begged him, "Daddy darling, can't the band have something to drink?" And the perfect afternoon slowly ripened, slowly faded, slowly its petals closed. Never a more delightful garden party. The greatest success. Quite the most. Laura helped her mother with the goodbyes. They stood side by side in the porch till it was all over. All over, thank heaven," said Mrs. Sheridan. "Round up the others, Laura. Let's go and have some fresh coffee. I'm exhausted. Yes, it's been very successful, but oh, these parties. Why will you children insist on giving parties?" And they all of them sat down in the deserted marquee. "Have a sandwich, Daddy dear. I wrote the flag." "Thanks." Mr. Sheridan took a bite and the sandwich was gone. He took another. "I suppose you didn't hear of a beastly accident that happened today?" he said. "My dear," said Mrs. Sheridan, holding up her hand, "we did. It nearly ruined the party. Laura insisted we should put it off." "Oh, Mother!" Laura didn't want to be teased about it. "It was a horrible affair all the same," said Mr. Sheridan. "The chap was married too. Lived just below in the lane, and leaves a wife and half a dozen kiddies, so they say." An awkward little silence fell. Mrs. Sheridan fidgeted with her cup. Really, it was very tactless of Father. Suddenly she looked up. There on the table were all those sandwiches, cakes, puffs, all uneaten, all going to be wasted. She had one of her brilliant ideas. "I know," she said. "Let's make up a basket. Let's send that poor creature some of this perfectly good food. At any rate, it will be the greatest treat for the children. Don't you agree? And she's sure to have neighbors calling in, and so on. What a point to have it all ready prepared. Laura?" She jumped up. "Get me the big basket out of the stairs cupboard." "But Mother, do you really think it's a good idea?" said Laura. Again, how curious, she seemed to be different from them all. To take scraps from their party. Would the poor woman really like that? "Of course. What's the matter with you today? An hour or two ago you were insisting on us being sympathetic, and now—" "Oh well, Laura ran for the basket. It was filled. It was heaped by her mother. "Take it yourself, darling," said she. "Run down just as you are. No, wait. Take the arum lilies too. People of that class are so impressed by arum lilies." "The stems will ruin her lace frock," said practical Jose. So they would. Just in time. "Only the basket then," and Laura. Her mother followed her out of the marquee. "Don't on any account." What mother? No, better not put such ideas into the child's head. "Nothing, run along." It was just growing dusky as Laura shut their garden gates. A big dog ran by like a shadow. The road gleamed white, and down below in the hollow the little cottages were in deep shade. How quiet it seemed after the afternoon. Here she was going down the hill to somewhere where a man lay dead, and she couldn't realize it. Why couldn't she? She stopped a minute, and it seemed to her that kisses, voices, tinkling spoons, laughter, the smell of crushed grass were somehow inside her. She had no room for anything else. How strange. She looked up at the pale sky, and all she thought was, yes, it was the most successful party. Now the broad road was crossed. The lane began, smoky and dark. Women in shawls and men's tweed caps hurried by. Men hung over the palings. The children played in the doorways. A low hum came from the mean little cottages. In some of them there was a flicker of light, and a shadow, crab-like, moved across the window. Laura bent her head and hurried on. She wished now she had put on a coat. How her frock shone! And the big hat with the velvet streamer, if only it was another hat. Were the people looking at her? They must be. It was a mistake to have come. She knew all along it was a mistake. Should she go back even now? No, too late. This was the house. It must be. A dark knot of people stood outside. Beside the gate, an old woman with a crutch sat in a chair, watching. She had her feet on a newspaper. The voices stopped as Laura drew near. The group parted. It was as though she was expected, as though they had known she was coming here. Laura was terribly nervous. Tossing the velvet ribbon over her shoulder, she said to a woman standing by, "Is this Mrs. Scott's house?" And the woman, smiling queerly, said, "It is, my lass." Oh, to be away from this. She actually said, "Help me, God," as she walked up the tiny path and knocked. To be away from those staring eyes, or be covered up in anything, one of those women's shawls even. "I'll just leave the basket and go," she decided. "I shan't even wait for it to be emptied." Then the door opened. A little woman in black showed in the gloom. Laura said, "Are you Mrs. Scott?" But to her horror the woman answered, "Walk in, please, miss," and she was shut in the passage. "No," said Laura, "I don't want to come in. I only want to leave this basket. Mother sent." The little woman in the gloomy passage seemed not to have heard her. "Step this way, please, miss," she said in an oily voice, and Laura followed her. She found herself in a wretched little low kitchen, lighted by a smoky lamp. There was a woman sitting before the fire. Said the little creature who had let her in. It's a young lady." She turned to Laura. She said meaningly, "I'm her sister, miss. You'll excuse her, won't you?" "Oh, but of course," said Laura. Please don't disturb her. I only want to leave." But at that moment the woman at the fire turned round. Her face, puffed up, red, with swollen eyes and swollen lips, looked terrible. She seemed as though she couldn't understand why Laura was there. What did it mean? Why was this stranger standing in the kitchen with a basket? What was it all about? And the poor face puckered up again. "All right, my dear," said the other. "I'll thank the young lady." And again she began, "You'll excuse her, miss, I'm sure." And her face, swollen too, tried an oily smile. Laura only wanted to get out, to get away. She was back in the passage. The door opened. She walked straight through into the bedroom where the dead man was lying. "You'd like a look at him, wouldn't you?" said M's sister, and she brushed past Laura over to the bed. "Don't be afraid, my lass." And now her voice sounded fond and sly, and fondly she drew down the sheet. "You looks a picture. There's nothing to show. Come along, my dear." Laura came. There lay a young man, fast asleep, sleeping so soundly, so deeply, that he was far, far away from them both. Oh, so remote, so peaceful. He was dreaming. Never wake him up again. His head was sunk in the pillow, his eyes were closed, they were blind under the closed eyelids. He was given up to his dream. What did garden parties and baskets and lace frocks matter to him? He was far from all those things. He was wonderful, beautiful. While they were laughing and while the band was playing, this marvel had come to the lane. "Happy, happy, all is well," said that sleeping face. "This is just as it should be. I am content." But all the same you had to cry, and she couldn't go out of the room without saying something to him. Laura gave a loud childish sob. "Forgive my hat," she said. And this time she didn't wait for M's sister. She found her way out of the door, down the path, past all those dark people. At the corner of the lane she met Laurie. He stepped out of the shadow. "Is that you, Laura?" "Yes." "Mother was getting anxious. Was it all right?" "Yes, quite. Oh, Laurie." She took his arm. She pressed up against him. "I say, you're not crying, are you?" asked her brother. Laura shook her head. She was. Laurie put his arm round her shoulder. "Don't cry," he said in his warm, loving voice. "Was it awful?" "No," sobbed Laura. "It was simply marvelous." "But Laurie—" She stopped. She looked at her brother. "Isn't life," she stammered, "isn't life." But what life was she couldn't explain. No matter. He quite understood. "Isn't it, darling?" said Laurie.
Jimmy Valentine, O. Henry. A guard came to the prison shoe shop, where Jimmy Valentine was assiduously stitching uppers, and escorted him to the front office. There the warden handed Jimmy his pardon, which had been signed that morning by the governor. Jimmy took it in a tired kind of way. He had served nearly 10 months of a 4-year sentence. He had expected to stay only about 3 months at the longest. When a man with as many friends on the outside as Jimmy Valentine had is received in the stir, it is hardly worthwhile to cut his hair. "Now, Valentine," said the warden, "you'll go out in the morning. Brace up, and make a man of yourself. You're not a bad fellow at heart. Stop cracking safes, and live straight." "Me?" said Jimmy in surprise. "Why, I never cracked a safe in my life." "Oh no," laughed the warden, "of course not. Let's see now. How was it you happened to get sent up on that Springfield job? Was it because you wouldn't prove an alibi for fear of compromising somebody in extremely high-tone society? Or was it simply a case of a mean old jury that had it in for you? It's always one or the other with you innocent victims." "Me," said Jimmy, still blankly virtuous. "Why, warden, I never was in Springfield in my life." "Take him back, Cronin," said the warden, "and fix him up with outgoing clothes. Unlock him at 7 in the morning, and let him come to the bullpen. Better think over my advice, Valentine." At 7:15 on the next morning, Jimmy stood in the warden's outer office. He had on a suit of the villainously fitting, ready-made clothes and a pair of the stiff, squeaky shoes that the state furnishes to its discharged compulsory guests. The clerk handed him a railroad ticket and the $5 bill with which the law expected him to rehabilitate himself into good citizenship and prosperity. The warden gave him a cigar and shook hands. Valentine 9762 was chronicled on the books, pardoned by governor, and Mr. James Valentine walked out into the sunshine. Disregarding the song of the birds, the waving green trees, and the smell of the flowers, Jimmy headed straight for a restaurant. There, he tasted the first sweet joys of liberty in the shape of a broiled chicken and a bottle of white wine, followed by a cigar, a grade better than the one the warden had given him. From there, he proceeded leisurely to the depot. He tossed a quarter into the hat of a blind man sitting by the door and boarded his train. 3 hours set him down in a little town near the state line. He went to the cafe of one Mike Dolan and shook hands with Mike, who was alone behind the bar. "Sorry we couldn't make it sooner, Jimmy, me boy," said Mike, "but we had that protest from Springfield to buck against, and the governor nearly balked. Feeling all right?" "Fine," said Jimmy. "Got my key?" He got his key and went upstairs, unlocking the door of a room at the rear. Everything was just as he had left it. There on the floor was still Ben Price's collar button that had been torn from that eminent detective's shirt band when they had overpowered Jimmy to arrest him. Pulling out from the wall a folding bed, Jimmy slid back a panel in the wall and dragged out a dust-covered suitcase. He opened this and gazed fondly at the finest set of burglar's tools in the East. It was a complete set, made of specially tempered steel, the latest designs in drills, punches, braces, and bits, jimmies, clamps, and augers, with 2 or 3 novelties, invented by Jimmy himself, in which he took pride. Over $900 they had cost him to have made at a place where they make such things for the profession. In half an hour Jimmy went downstairs and through the cafe. He was now dressed in tasteful and well-fitting clothes and carried his dusted and cleaned suitcase in his hand. "Got anything on?" asked Mike Dolan genially. "Me?" said Jimmy in a puzzled tone. "I don't understand. I'm representing the New York Amalgamated Short Snap Biscuit Cracker and Frazzled Wheat Company." This statement delighted Mike to such an extent that Jimmy had to take a seltzer and milk on the spot. He never touched hard drinks. A week after the release of Valentine, 9762, there was a neat job of safe burglary done in Richmond, Indiana, with no clue to the author. A scant $800 was all that was secured. 2 weeks after that, a patented, improved, burglar-proof safe in Logansport was opened like a cheese to the tune of $1,500, currency, securities, and silver untouched. That began to interest the rogue catchers. Then an old-fashioned bank safe in Jefferson City became active and threw out of its crater an eruption of banknotes amounting to $5,000. The losses were now high enough to bring the matter up into Ben Price's class of work. By comparing notes, a remarkable similarity in the methods of the burglaries was noticed. Ben Price investigated the scenes of the robberies and was heard to remark, "That's Dandy Jim Valentine's autograph. He's resumed business. Look at that combination, knob jerked out as easy as pulling up a radish in wet weather. He's got the only clamps that can do it, and look how clean those tumblers were punched out. Jimmy never has to drill but one hole. Yes, I guess I want Mr. Valentine. He'll do his bit next time without any short time or clemency foolishness." Ben Price knew Jimmy's habits. He had learned them while working on the Springfield case. Long jumps, quick getaways, no Confederates, and a taste for good society these ways had helped Mr. Valentine to become noted as a successful dodger of retribution. It was given out that Ben Price had taken up the trail of the elusive cracksman, and other people with burglar-proof safes felt more at ease. One afternoon, Jimmy Valentine and his suitcase climbed out of the mail hack in Elmore, a little town 5 miles off the railroad down in the blackjack country of Arkansas. Jimmy, looking like an athletic young senior just home from college, went down the board sidewalk toward the hotel. A young lady crossed the street, passed him at the corner, and entered a door over which was the sign, The Elmore Bank. Jimmy Valentine looked into her eyes, forgot what he was, and became another man. She lowered her eyes and colored slightly. Young men of Jimmy's style and looks were scarce in Elmore. Jimmy collared a boy that was loafing on the steps of the bank as if he were one of the stockholders and began to ask him questions about the town, feeding him dimes at intervals. By and by the young lady came out, looking royally unconscious of the young man with the suitcase, and went her way. "Isn't that young lady Polly Simpson?" asked Jimmy, with specious guile. "No," said the boy. "She's Annabel Adams. Her pa owns this bank. Why'd you come to Elmore for? Is that a gold watch chain? I'm gonna get a bulldog. Got any more dimes?" Jimmy went to the Planters Hotel, registered as Ralph D. Spencer, and engaged a room. He leaned on the desk and declared his platform to the clerk. He said he had come to Elmore to look for a location to go into business. How was the shoe business now in the town? He had thought of the shoe business. Was there an opening? The clerk was impressed by the clothes and manner of Jimmy. He himself was something of a pattern of fashion to the thinly gilded youth of Elmore, but he now perceived his shortcomings. While trying to figure out Jimmy's manner of tying his four in hand, he cordially gave information. Yes, there ought to be a good opening in the shoe line. There wasn't an exclusive shoe store in the place. The dry goods and general stores handled them. Business in all lines was fairly good. Hoped Mr. Spencer would decide to locate in Elmore. He would find it a pleasant town to live in, and the people very sociable. Mr. Spencer thought he would stop over in the town a few days and look over the situation. No, the clerk needn't call the boy. He would carry up his suitcase himself. It was rather heavy. Mr. Ralph Spencer, the phoenix that arose from Jimmy Valentine's ashes, left by the flame of a sudden and alterative attack of love, remained in Elmore and prospered. He opened a shoe store and secured a good run of trade. Socially, he was also a success and made many friends. And he accomplished the wish of his heart. He met Miss Annabel Adams and became more and more captivated by her charms. At the end of a year, the situation of Mr. Ralph Spencer was this. He had won the respect of the community, his shoe store was flourishing, and he and Annabel were engaged to be married in 2 weeks. Mr. Adams, the typical, plodding country banker, approved of Spencer. Annabel's pride in him almost equaled her affection. He was as much at home in the family of Mr. Adams and that of Annabel's married sister as if he were already a member. One day Jimmy sat down in his room and wrote this letter, which he mailed to the safe address of one of his old friends in St. Louis. Dear old pal, I want you to be at Sullivan's place in Little Rock next Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. I want you to wind up some little matters for me. And also, I want to make you a present of my kit of tools. I know you'll be glad to get them. You couldn't duplicate the lot for $1,000. Say, Billy, I've quit the old business a year ago. I've got a nice store. I'm making an honest living, and I'm going to marry the finest girl on earth 2 weeks from now. It's the only life, Billy, the straight one. I wouldn't touch $1 of another man's money now for $1 million. After I get married, I'm going to sell out and go west, where there won't be so much danger of having old scores brought up against me. I tell you, Billy, she's an angel. She believes in me, and I wouldn't do another crooked thing for the whole world. Be sure to be at Sully's, for I must see you. I'll bring along the tools with me. Your old friend Jimmy. On the Monday night after Jimmy wrote this letter, Ben Price jogged unobtrusively into Elmore in a livery buggy. He lounged about town in his quiet way until he found out what he wanted to know. From the drug store across the street from Spencer's shoe store, He got a good look at Ralph D. Spencer. "Going to marry the banker's daughter, are you, Jimmy?" said Ben to himself softly. "Well, I don't know." The next morning Jimmy took breakfast at the Adamses. He was going to Little Rock that day to order his wedding suit and buy something nice for Annabel. That would be the first time he had left town since he came to Elmore. It had been more than a year now since those last professional jobs, and he thought he could safely venture out. After breakfast, quite a family party went downtown together. Mr. Adams, Annabel, Jimmy, and Annabel's married sister, with her 2 little girls, aged 5 and 9. They came by the hotel where Jimmy still boarded, and he ran up to his room and brought along his suitcase. Then they went on to the bank. There stood Jimmy's horse and buggy, and Dolph Gibson, who was going to drive him over to the railroad station. All went inside the high, carved oak railings into the banking room, Jimmy included. For Mr. Adams's future son-in-law was welcome anywhere. The clerks were pleased to be greeted by the good-looking, agreeable young man who was going to marry Miss Annabel. Jimmy set his suitcase down. Annabel, whose heart was bubbling with happiness and lively youth, put on Jimmy's hat and picked up the suitcase. "Wouldn't I make a nice drummer?" said Annabel. "My, Ralph, how heavy it is! Feels like it was full of gold bricks." "Lot of nickel-plated shoehorns in there," said Jimmy, coolly. "Bet I'm going to return. Thought I'd save express charges by taking them up. I'm getting awfully economical." The Elmore Bank had just put in a new safe and vault. Mr. Adams was very proud of it and insisted on an inspection by everyone. The vault was a small one, but it had a new, patented door. It fastened with 3 solid steel bolts, thrown simultaneously with a single handle, and had a time lock. Mr. Adams beamingly explained its workings to Mr. Spencer, who showed a courteous, but not too intelligent interest. The 2 children, May and Agatha, were delighted by the shining metal and funny clock and knobs. While they were thus engaged, Ben Price sauntered in and leaned on his elbow, looking casually inside between the railings. He told the teller that he didn't want anything. He was just waiting for a man he knew. Suddenly there was a scream or two from the women, and a commotion. Unperceived by the elders, May, the 9-year-old girl, in a spirit of play, had shut Agatha in the vault. She had then shot the bolts and turned the knob of the combination as she had seen Mr. Adams do. The old banker sprang to the handle and tugged at it for a moment. "The door can't be opened," he groaned. "The clock hasn't been wound, nor the combination set." Agatha's mother screamed again, hysterically. "Hush," said Mr. Adams, raising his trembling hand. "All be quiet for a moment. Agatha," he called as loudly as he could. "Listen to me." During the following silence they could just hear the faint sound of the child wildly shrieking in the dark vault in a panic of terror. "My precious darling," wailed the mother. "She will die of fright. Open the door. Oh, break it open. Can't you men do something?" "There isn't a man nearer than Little Rock who can open that door," said Mr. Adams in a shaky voice. "My God, Spencer, what shall we do? That child, she can't stand it long in there. There isn't enough air, and besides, she'll go into convulsions from fright." Agatha's mother, frantic now, beat the door of the vault with her hands. Somebody wildly suggested dynamite. Annabel turned to Jimmy, her large eyes full of anguish, but not yet despairing. To a woman nothing seems quite impossible to the powers of the man she worships. "Can't you do something, Ralph? Try, won't you?" He looked at her with a queer, soft smile on his lips and in his keen eyes. "Annabel," he said, "give me that rose you are wearing, will you?" Hardly believing that she heard him all right, she unpinned the bud from the bosom of her dress and placed it in his hand. Jimmy stuffed it into his vest pocket, threw off his coat, and pulled up his shirt sleeves. With that act, Ralph D. Spencer passed away, and Jimmy Valentine took his place. "Get away from the door, all of you," he commanded shortly. He set his suitcase on the table and opened it out flat. From that time on, he seemed to be unconscious of the presence of anyone else. He laid out the shining, queer implements swiftly and orderly, whistling softly to himself as he always did when at work. In a deep silence and immovable, the others watched him as if under a spell. In a minute, Jimmy's pet drill was biting smoothly into the steel door. In 10 minutes, breaking his own burglarious record, he threw back the bolts and opened the door. Agatha, almost collapsed, but safe, was gathered into her mother's arms. Jimmy Valentine put on his coat and walked outside the railings towards the front door. As he went, he thought he heard a faraway voice that he once knew call Ralph, but he never hesitated. At the door, a big man stood somewhat in his way. "Hello, Ben," said Jimmy, still with his strange smile. "Got around at last, have you? Well, let's go. I don't know that it makes much difference now." And then Ben Price acted rather strangely. "Guess you're mistaken, Mr. Spencer," he said. "Don't believe I recognize you. Your buggy's waiting for you, ain't it?" And Ben Price turned and strolled down the street. Of Studies, Francis Bacon, 1625. Studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Their chief use for delight is in privateness and retiring, for ornament is in discourse, and for ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. For expert men can execute, and perhaps judge of particulars one by one, but the general counsels and the plots and marshalling of affairs come best from those that are learned. To spend too much time in studies is sloth. To use them too much for ornament is affectation. To make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. They perfect nature, and are perfected by experience, for natural abilities are like natural plants that need pruning by study, and studies themselves do give forth directions too much at large, except they be bounded in by experience. Crafty men condemn studies, simple men admire them, and wise men use them, for they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them, and above them, won by observation. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. That is, some books are to be read only in parts, others to be read, but not curiously, and some few to be read wholly, and with diligence and attention. Some books also may be read by deputy, and extracts made of them by others, but that would be only in the less important arguments, and the meaner sort of books. Else distilled books are like common distilled waters, flashy things. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. And therefore if a man write little, he had need have a great memory. If he confer little, he had need have a present wit. And if he read little, he had need have much cunning, to seem to know that he doth not. Histories make men wise, poets witty, the mathematics subtle, natural philosophy deep, moral grave, logic and rhetoric able to contend. Abant studia in mores, studies pass into and influence manners. Nay, there is no stone or impediment in the wit, but may be wrought out by fit studies, like as diseases of the body may have appropriate exercises. Bowling is good for the stone and reins, shooting for the lungs and breast, gentle walking for the stomach, riding for the head, and the like. So if a man's wit be wandering, let him study the mathematics, for in demonstrations, if his wit be called away never so little, he must begin again. If his wit be not apt to distinguish or find differences, let him study the schoolmen, for they are simini sectors, splitters of hairs. If ye be not apt to beat over matters, and to call up one thing to prove and illustrate another, let him study the lawyer's cases. So every defect of the mind may have a
Nobel Lecture. Mother Teresa, as we have gathered here together to thank God for the Nobel Peace Prize, I think it will be beautiful that we pray the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, which always surprises me very much. We pray this prayer every day after Holy Communion because it is very fitting for each one of us. And I always wonder that 400 to 500 years ago, as St. Francis of Assisi composed this prayer, that they had the same difficulties that we have today, as we compose this prayer that fits very nicely for us also. I think some of you already have got it, so we will pray together. Let us thank God for the opportunity that we all have together today, for this gift of peace that reminds us that we have been created to live that peace. And Jesus became man to bring that good news to the poor. He, being God, became man in all things like us except sin. And he proclaimed very clearly that he had come to give the good news. The news was peace to all of goodwill. And this is something that we all want, the peace of heart. And God loved the world so much that he gave his Son. It was a giving it. Is as much as if to say it hurt God to give, because he loved the world so much that he gave his Son, and he gave him to Virgin Mary. And what did she do with him? As soon as he came in her life, immediately she went in haste to give that good news. And as she came into the house of her cousin, the unborn child in the womb of Elizabeth leapt with joy. That little unborn child was the first messenger of peace. He recognized the Prince of Peace. He recognized that Christ has come to bring the good news for you and for me. And as if that was not enough, he died on the cross to show that greater love, and he died for you and for me, and for that leper, and for that man dying of hunger, and that naked person lying in the street, not only of Calcutta, but of Africa, and New York, and London, and Oslo, and insisted that we love one another as he loves each one of us. And we read that in the Gospel very clearly. Love as I have loved you, as I love you, as the Father has loved me. Love you, and the harder the Father loved him, he gave him to us. And how much we love one another, we too must give each other until it hurts. It is not enough for us to say, I love God, but I do not love my neighbor. St. John says, you are a liar if you say you love God and you won't love your neighbor. How can you love God whom you do not see if you do not love your neighbor whom you see, whom you touch, with whom you live? And so this is very important for us to realize that love, to be true, has to hurt. It hurt Jesus to love us. It hurt him. And to make sure we remember his great love, he made himself the bread of life to satisfy our hunger for his love. Our hunger for God, because we have been created for that love. We have been created in his image. We have been created to love and be loved. And then he has become man to make it possible for us to love as he loved us. He makes himself the hungry one, the naked one, the homeless one, the sick one, the one in prison, the lonely one, the unwanted one. And he says, you did it to me, hungry for our love. And this is the hunger of our poor people. This is the hunger that you and I must find. It may be in our own home. I never forget an opportunity I had in visiting a home where they had all these old parents of sons and daughters who had just put them in an institution and forgotten maybe. And I went there, and I saw in that home they had everything, beautiful things, but everybody was looking towards the door, and I did not see a single one with their smile on their face. And I turned to the sister and I asked, how is that? How is it that the people, they have everything here, why are they all looking towards the door? Why are they not smiling? I am so used to see the smile on our people, even the dying ones smile, and she said, this is nearly every day. They are expecting. They are hoping that a son or daughter will come to visit them. They are hurt because they are forgotten. And see, this is where love comes. That poverty comes right there in our own home, even neglect to love. Maybe in our own family we have somebody who's feeling lonely, who's feeling sick, who's feeling worried. And these are difficult days for everybody. Are we there? Are we there to receive them? Is the mother there to receive the child? I was surprised in the West to see so many young boys and girls given into drugs. And I tried to find out why. Why is it like that? And the answer was, because there is no one in the family to receive them. Father and mother are so busy, they have no time. Young parents are in some institution and the child takes back to the street and gets involved in something. We are talking of peace. These are things that break peace. But I feel the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because it is a direct war, a direct killing, direct murder by the mother herself. And we read in the scripture, for God says very clearly, even if a mother could forget her child, I will not forget you. I have carved you in the palm of my hand. We are carved in the palm of his hand, so close to him that unborn child has been carved in the hand of God. And that is what strikes me most, the beginning of that sentence, that even if a mother could forget something impossible, but even if she could forget, I will not forget you. And today, the greatest means, the greatest destroyer of peace is abortion. And we who are standing here, our parents wanted us. We would not be here if our parents would do that to us. Our children, we want them, we love them, but what of the millions? Many people are very, very concerned with the children in India, with the children in Africa, where quite a number die, maybe of malnutrition, of hunger and so on. But millions are dying deliberately by the will of the mother. And this is what is the greatest destroyer of peace today. Because if a mother can kill her own child, what is left for me to kill you and you kill me? There is nothing between. And this I appeal in India. I appeal everywhere. Let us bring the child back, and this year being the child's year. What have we done for the child? At the beginning of the year I spoke everywhere and I said, let us make this year that we make every single child born and unborn wanted. And today is the end of the year? Have we really made the children wanted? I will give you something terrifying. We are fighting abortion by adoption. We have saved thousands of lives. We have sent words to all the clinics, to the hospitals, police stations. Please don't destroy the child. We will take the child. So every hour of the day and night, it's always somebody. We have quite a number of unwedded mothers. Tell them, come, we will take care of you. We will take the child from you, and we will get a home for the child. And we have a tremendous demand from families who have no children. That is the blessing of God for us. And also, we are doing another thing which is very beautiful. We are teaching our beggars, our leprosy patients, our slum dwellers, our people of the street, natural family planning. And in Calcutta alone in 6 years, it is all in Calcutta, we have had 61,273 babies less from the families who would have had. But because they practice this natural way of abstaining, of self-control, out of love for each other, we teach them the temperature meter, which is very beautiful, very simple, and which our poor people understand. And you know what they have told me? Our family is healthy, our family is united, and we can have a baby whenever we want. So clear those people in the street, those beggars. And I think that if our people can do like that, how much more you and all the others who can know those A's means without destroying the life that God has created in us. The poor people are very great people. They can teach us so many beautiful things. The other day, one of them came to thank and said, "You people who have vowed chastity, you are the best people to teach us family planning, because it is nothing more than self-control out of love for each other." And I think they said a beautiful sentence. And these are people who maybe have nothing to eat, maybe they have not a home where to live, but they are great people. The poor are very wonderful people. One evening, we went out and we picked up 4 people from the street, and one of them was in a most terrible condition, and I told the sisters, "You take care of the other 3. I take of this one that looked worse." So I did for her all that my love can do. I put her in bed, and there was such a beautiful smile on her face. She took hold of my hand as she said one word only, "Thank you," and she died. I could not help but examine my conscience before her, and I asked what would I say if I was in her place. And my answer was very simple. I would have tried to draw a little attention to myself. I would have said I am hungry, that I am dying, I am cold, I am in pain or something, but she gave me much more. She gave me her grateful love, and she died with a smile on her face. As that man whom we picked up from the drain, half eaten with worms, and we brought him to the home. I have lived like an animal in the street, but I am going to die like an angel, loved and cared for. And it was so wonderful to see the greatness of that man who could speak like that, who could die like that, without blaming anybody, without cursing anybody, without comparing anything. Like an angel. This is the greatness of our people. And that is why we believe what Jesus had said. I was hungry, I was naked, I was homeless, I was unwanted, unloved, uncared for, and you did it to me. I believe that we are not real social workers. We may be doing social work in the eyes of the people, but we are really contemplatives in the heart of the world. For we are touching the body of Christ 24 hours. We have 24 hours in this presence, and so you and I, you too try to bring that presence of God in your family, for the family that prays together stays together. And I think that we in our family don't need bombs and guns to destroy, to bring peace. Just get together, love one another, bring that peace, that joy, that strength of presence of each other in the home. And we will be able to overcome all the evil that is in the world. There is so much suffering, so much hatred, so much misery, and we, with our prayer, with our sacrifice, are beginning at home. Love begins at home, and is not how much we do, but how much love we put in the action that we do. It is to God Almighty. How much we do it does not matter, because He is infinite, but how much love we put in that action. How much we do to Him in the person that we are serving. Some time ago in Calcutta we had great difficulty in getting sugar, and one don't know how the word got around to the children. And a little boy of 4 years old, a Hindu boy, went home and told his parents, "I will not eat sugar for 3 days. I will give my sugar to Mother Teresa for her children." After 3 days, his father and mother brought him to our home. I had never met them before, and this little one could scarcely pronounce my name, but he knew exactly what he had come to do. He knew that he wanted to share his love. And this is why I have received such a lot of love from you all. From the time that I have come here, I have simply been surrounded with love, and with real understanding love. It could feel as if everyone in India, everyone in Africa is somebody very special to you, and I felt quite at home. I was telling Sister today, I feel in the convent with the sisters as if I am in Calcutta with my own sisters. So completely at home here, right here. And so here I am talking with you. I want you to find the poor here, right in your own home first, and begin love there. Be that good news to your own people. And find out about your next door neighbor. Do you know who they are? I had the most extraordinary experience with a Hindu family that had 8 children. A gentleman came to our house and said, "Mother Teresa, there is a family with 8 children. They have not eaten for so long. Do something." So I took some rice and I went there immediately, and I saw the children, their eyes shining with hunger. I don't know if you've ever seen hunger, but one have seen it very often. And the lady of the house took the rice, divided it, and went out. When she came back, I asked her, "Where did you go? What did you do?" And she gave me a very simple answer. They are hungry too. What struck me most was that she knew. And who are they? A Muslim family, and she knew. I didn't bring more rice that evening because I wanted them to enjoy the joy of sharing. But there were those children, radiating joy, sharing the joy with their mother because she had the love to give. And you see, this is where love begins, at home. And I want you, and I am very grateful for what I have received. It has been a tremendous experience, and I go back to India We'll be back by next week, the 15th, I hope, and I will be able to bring your love. And I know well that you have not given from your abundance, but you have given until it has hurt you. Today, the little children they have, I was so surprised. There is so much joy for the children that are hungry, that the children, like themselves, will need love and care and tenderness like they get so much from their parents. So let us thank God that we have had this opportunity to come to know each other, and this knowledge of each other has brought us very close. And we will be able to help not only the children of India and Africa, but we'll be able to help the children of the whole world. Because as you know, our sisters are all over the world. And with this prize that I have received as a prize of peace, I am going to try to make the home for many people that have no home. Because I believe that love begins at home. And if we can create a home for the poor, I think that more and more love will spread, and we will be able, through this understanding love, to bring peace, be the good news to the poor. The poor in our own family first, in our country, and in the world. To be able to do this, our sisters, our lives have to be woven with prayer. They have to be woven with Christ to be able to understand, to be able to share. Because today there is so much suffering, and I feel that the passion of Christ is being relived all over again. Are we there to share that passion, to share that suffering of people around the world, not only in the poor countries, but I found the poverty of the West so much more difficult to remove. When I pick up a person from the street, hungry, I give him a plate of rice, a piece of bread, I have satisfied. I have removed that hunger. But a person that is shut out, that feels unwanted, unloved, terrified, the person that has been thrown out from society, that poverty is so hurtable and so much, and I find that very difficult. Our sisters are working amongst that kind of people in the West. So you must pray for us that we may be able to be that good news. But we cannot do that without you. You have to do that here in your country. You must come to know the poor. Maybe our people here have material things, everything. But I think that if we all look into our own homes, how difficult we find it sometimes to smile at each other, and that the smile is the beginning of love. And so let us always meet each other with a smile. For the smile is the beginning of love. And once we begin to love each other naturally, we want to do something. So you pray for our sisters and for me and for our brothers and for our co-workers that are around the world. We may remain faithful to the gift of God, to love Him and serve Him in the poor together with you. What we have done, we should not have been able to do if you did not share with your prayers, with your gifts, this continual giving. But I don't want you to give me from your abundance. I want that you give me until it hurts. The other day I received $15 from a man who has been on his back for 20 years, and the only part that he can move is his right hand, and the only companion that he enjoys is smoking. And he said to me, I do not smoke for 1 week, and I send you this money. It must have been a terrible sacrifice for him. But see how beautiful, how he shared, and with that money I bought bread, and I gave to those who are hungry with a joy on both sides. He was giving, and the poor were receiving. This is something that you and it is a gift of God to us to be able to share our love with others. And let it be as it was for Jesus. Let us love one another as He loved us. Let us love Him with undivided love. And the joy of loving Him and each other let us give now that Christmas is coming so close. Let us keep that joy of loving Jesus in our hearts and share that joy with all that we come in touch with. And that radiating joy is real. For we have no reason not to be happy because we have no Christ with us. Christ in our hearts, Christ in the poor that we meet, Christ in the smile that we give and the smile that we receive.
Duchess, Robert Browning, 1812 to 1889, Ferrara. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will please you sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. And seemed as they would ask me if they durst how such a glance came there, so not the first. Are you to turn and ask thus? Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, it was all one. My favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours forsooth and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me.
Still I rise, Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history. With your bitter, twisted lies, you may trod me in the very dirt. But still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high. Still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines, digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide. Welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.